Alright, so I know a lot of people wanted me to make a spoiler-filled review for The Hobbit: An Unexpected Journey, and I'll try to incorporate that in this one, but my main motivation for doing this video is I saw The Hobbit: An Unexpected Journey in 24 frames a second, which is the normal cinematic format, and I thought to myself, alright, if this is different enough, I will do a video talking about how it's different enough. So here I am making a video about it, so by implication, you already know that I really felt like it was a different experience. Now I have to illustrate, I stand by my initial review of the movie, and for those of you who are apparently under the impression that the rating I would buy the movie on Blu-ray is a bad or negative rating, that is the second highest rating I can give a movie. It's not like I called the movie a piece of shit. I understand most of you understand this, but after seeing it in 24 frames a second, I have to illustrate a few more points. And that is that sadly, the 48 frames a second format that Peter Jackson filmed the movie in does compromise the experience. I think it's a really cool technological leap that he's making, but in the end, it does take you out of the movie, and here's why. Because we are human beings, we're creatures of habit, we are used to 24 frames a second for cinema. That's the format that's been around forever. So when you go, okay, here's a new format and it looks completely different, it jars people's minds. A movie's supposed to be immersive, you know, you're in the movie, you're up in the tower with John McClane, you're in Middle Earth with the Fellowship. In this case, you should feel like you're in Middle Earth with the dwarves. But what it did for me, and I have to assume it did for a lot of people, given that the rating on Rotten Tomatoes is surprisingly low, is that it took them out of the movie. For me, I felt like I was someone sitting in the movie theater watching a movie play in 48 frames a second. It's not immersive. I didn't feel like I was in Middle Earth on this adventure, which then means slow moments feel slower, long moments feel longer. The irony in the no-win situation, the Kobayashi Maru of it all, is that the format that The Hobbit: An Unexpected Journey was filmed in, to be more immersive, does the exact opposite for the audience. Kind of a bummer, really. I mean, the 48 frames a second obviously compromised my experience in a way that I didn't really understand until I also saw it in 24 frames a second. Then after 24 frames a second, I was like, okay, that was so much more immersive that it was just a much better experience, which is worth addressing right here. And I run my TV on AutoMotion Plus, so I get that 120 hertz, 60 frames a second look, where it looks like a soap opera for movies. I watch it like that because I think it looks cool. I also play PC games, which run at 60 frames a second, but watching a movie like that looks completely different in my opinion. It's just a different looking thing that you can't describe, you just have to see it and you'll be like, oh, that's what Jeremy was talking about. Okay. Filming the movie in twice the frame rate makes the movie look better, but it doesn't necessarily make the movie better. Now, like I said before, I do find it interesting. I want to see where they take the technology, but I'm just saying, if you're gonna do a test run like this, don't do it on a franchise like The Hobbit. Do it on like Step Up 6 or something. Just see what people think of it. You test the water by dipping your toe in it. You don't jump off the high dive to see how warm or cold the water is. Just saying. So I imagine there are a number of reviewers out there who watched it in 48 frames a second and are like, well, I've seen the movie now. I strongly urge everybody to watch it in 24 frames a second. Do that before you give your final thought, because it does absolutely change the experience. So on that, let's get to talking about some of the spoilers in the movie. All right, The Hobbit: An Unexpected Journey really starts out in the Shire, or at least you get a pretty badass prologue with a bunch of dragons, or at least a dragon. But then you're in the Shire and Ian Holm plays old Bilbo, which is funny, because you know when Gandalf's all like, you haven't aged a day. I don't know, he may have lied to his face a little bit, because Ian Holm looks really old, and I understand it. I'm sure him and Peter Jackson are friends, but you could have just had Ian Holm do the voiceover for the prologue, and then had the movie come in 60 years earlier with Martin Freeman as Bilbo, and then started the movie. Seeing Ian Holm play Bilbo now makes you go, well, he's older now than he was in Fellowship of the Ring, when this takes place like 30 minutes before Fellowship of the Ring, and it just confuses your brain. Even his hair looks different. Like I said before, there are some cameos in the movie where you're like, oh yeah, that was a cool cameo. Other cameos, well, I should say cameo, you're like, that was kind of forced. The forced cameo for me was Frodo Baggins. I liked seeing Frodo Baggins when he walks out of that room and he looks over at Bilbo and he smiles and he shakes his head and he keeps walking. I thought that was going to be the end of it, and I was fine with that. But the part that irritates me, my friend disagrees with me, and it's fine because human beings, it's just all opinions. Secret is out. Reviewers of the world just give you their opinions. That's between you and me. Don't tell anyone. But when Frodo's like, oh, I'm gonna go surprise Gandalf by the road, and he goes off, I was just like, you don't need to stitch The Hobbit and Fellowship of the Ring together down to the minute. If I'm gonna use a douchebag term, it just seems indulgent, and that's just kind of what it was for me. And Elijah Wood looks about 40 years old also. I think that pulls me out of it as well. But then the dwarves enter Bilbo's house, and they really frustrate him, and actually, the build-up, the Shire build-up of the entire movie, the second time watching it, I was like, well, yeah, we are par for the course for Fellowship of the Ring, But when I first watched Fellowship of the Ring, it was in 24 frames a second, like my second viewing of The Hobbit. It wasn't 48 frames a second, which I was sitting in the theater going, oh, I'm a guy in a theater watching The Shire. But then the movie goes on, you see some iconic scenes like the whole troll scene where they're gonna boil them or cook them or squash them into jelly. I love that scene because you see the troll statues in Fellowship of the Ring. And so I was looking, I was like, okay, I want to see if they freeze in the same position. I noticed that one pointing down. Props to that, and that's what Peter Jackson's great about. Those little details, it's what makes him a badass. Now, another thing that didn't irritate me the second time around watching The Hobbit was Radagast the Brown. And to be clear, for people who thought I called him the Jar Jar Binks of Middle-earth, I did not call him the Jar Jar Binks of Middle-earth. What I said was, if people do call him the Jar Jar Binks of Middle-earth, I'm not going to argue them, and I still wouldn't. Because I'd be like, oh, okay, I'm able to see your opinion. I can see how you would think that. All I said was, I wish they had done him differently, and I still wish they did him differently. However, with Gandalf going, he's a very great wizard, and him curing that little hedgehog of smoke monster disease from Lost or whatever he did, you're like, okay, yeah, he has power. But he's actually in the movie a lot less than I remember. I think it was one of those scenarios where I was like, I underhyped him to the point where when I watched the movie again, I was like, well, he's not as bad as I remember. When I said the last couple hours of this movie are completely badass, for me, it was when they got to Rivendell. When they got to Rivendell to the end of the movie, I love it all. I love seeing Elrond again, which is funny because I hadn't actually seen Gandalf and Galadriel interact at all. This is the first time in the movies you actually see that, and you really get the sense you're like, yeah, Galadriel, she really wants to hit that. You can see it too, Gandalf with a pipe in his hand and a leg in the other, all like, yes, call me old Toby. I'm just saying, it could happen, and she wants it to happen. I liked seeing Saruman also, because at this point, he's good. And he doesn't have much love for Radagast the Brown either. His consumption of mushrooms, which, if for nothing else, the Middle-earth movies, as I'm gonna call them, is teaching kids one thing. Eat mushrooms, you become some tripping tweaker hippie in the middle of the woods. Smoke some old Toby, and one day you can take out that thing. Smoke up, kids. This scene's cool for a couple reasons. One, you see Rivendell again, and that's all awesome. You see reoccurring characters and cameos, that's badass. But they're also finding out that the Necromancer is coming back. The Necromancer, for those of you who do not know, is Sauron. Yeah, like, you know, big evil of Lord of the Rings. Right now, all they know is a guy who calls himself the Necromancer all hanging out at Dol Guldur. Now they got bigger and better things to do, like, you know, get a treasure from a dragon. Skipping forward a little bit, let's talk about another scene that I felt is the scene that they could have taken out of this movie. In my review, when I was talking about some scenes that I felt would have been better left out and then included in the extended edition of The Hobbit: An Unexpected Journey, this is the scene I was talking about. And that's the scene when those two big rocks were kicking the shit out of each other, doing rock'em sock'em rocks. I'm fine with the fact that Middle-earth has big mountains that throw rocks at each other. Shit, they have trees that walk and talk. Yeah, they got mountains. This scene was so like, okay, we're leaving Rivendell, big mountains are kicking the shit out of each other, and now we're gonna rest. I think it would have been better to give us shorter cuts of the movie so the general populace can be like, oh, okay, now I'm invested with these characters, now I'm into their quest, I would like to see more. Oh, now we have an extended cut, I get to see more. But if you just throw the extended cut at people right off the bat, they're gonna be like, the movie just feels too long. I think if Peter Jackson had done it that way, The Hobbit: An Unexpected Journey would have been better received by some people. Not all people, I get it. Like, there are a lot of people who are like, no, it was perfect, cool. I'm just saying, if you did it that way, that would have been better for the general populace. Now, when the whole crew goes into the Goblin Cave, and you have that one goblin that sounds just like Ian McShane, but it's really not him, I guess. I love this scene, simply for one. This was the scene I was talking about when I was like, Gandalf is such a badass in this movie. It's when they're all there, and they're gonna start kicking the piss out of the dwarves, and that big light comes out of nowhere, just wipes everything out. Initially, before it showed who did it, I was like, I don't know who did that, but I really hope it's Gandalf. Sure enough, you see his silhouette with his pointy hat and his sword and his staff, and he walks up, he's like, take up your arms! I'm like, that's why you're a badass, old dude who's awesome. And then after that, more excitement ensues while Bilbo is doing riddles in the dark with Gollum. And this also has the scene, in any of the scenes in this movie, this is the scene where I was like, ugh. And it's the scene when that big goblin's there and he's like, what are you gonna do? And then Gandalf just slices his stomach and you see it cut through the fat. I mean, it looks CGI, but it looked like it cut through fat. And that's the thing I'm gonna point out in this movie. The Hobbit may have been written for kids, but the movie was not made for kids. Come on, the movie has decapitations and a big evil defiler holding up a dwarf's head. His severed head. Right there, I was like, it's not really made for kids. Unless kid cartoons and shows are showing bloody severed heads, in which case, where have I been? But again, the Riddles in the Dark segment with Gollum, I love this segment. Why? Because I get to do Gollum's voice again. But really, you get that emotion. You remember in the Fellowship of the Ring when Gandalf and Frodo are talking and Gandalf's like, pity. It was pity that stayed Bilbo's head. I hope they show that in the movie, and they totally do. That scene where Bilbo has Sting his sword to Gollum's neck, and Gollum turns around because he's invisible, because he can't see him, and he's just looking around, you see a tear trickle down his eye, you're like, oh man, he he did lose his precious. If anyone in Middle-earth is more entitled to have the ring other than Sauron himself, it is Gollum. Dude had a 500-year relationship with that thing. It's his precious. A scene where he's looking at his reflection, he's all like, just do it. Just do it for me. You're like, Bilbo, just put on the ring and run, dude. You're dead. And come on, be honest with yourselves. How many people were trying to figure out the riddles when Gollum and Bilbo were doing the riddles back and forth? Come on, you know you were. I was, shit. And then you think they get to safety and they're not because the big evil defiler orc is there and it was all cool. He's turning pine cones into grenades and that's badass. That's what wizards do. But this also has one of the most badass scenes, which is simultaneously one of the scenes that made me go, really? And that's the scene when all the good guys are trapped and the defiler's there on his warg and he's gonna wipe everyone out and the tree's all falling over and then Thorin's like, you know what? Not on my dead awesome warrior dwarf body who looks like a Klingon because I do. And he stands up all epically like he's gonna face down with him. He ends up whiffing it and taking a warg paw to the face. It doesn't matter. Point is, this moment is extremely awesome and for every badass moment you need a badass song. And the song plays and it's awesomely epic. Yet you're like, I recognize that song. I've heard it before in a Lord of the Rings movie. The song that plays in that scene is the identical song to the scene on Weathertop in Fellowship of the Ring when the Nazgul were closing in on the hobbits. It's the same exact song and you're like, it's a badass song, don't get me wrong, which rhymes, and I didn't mean for it to. But why didn't Howard Shore make an original badass song for that scene? It just kind of took me out of it a bit. It threw me off. I was like, it's cool, but why not an original song? We've already established that that song plays when evil is closing in on good. Maybe he played it to flip it around for the Hobbit. I don't know. And I love that scene when Bilbo's talking to Thorin and he's like, you're right. I think of the Shire. I think of my books. I miss them all. That's where I belong. At home. You don't have a home because it was taken from you, but I will try to help you get it back if I can. I was like, these are the Lord of the Rings moments right here, man. This is what Middle-earth brings out of its people. In conclusion, watching The Hobbit: An Unexpected Journey in 24 frames a second is more immersive than 48 frames a second, which is what 48 frames a second was designed to be, but absolutely is not. Let's see where they go with that tech later on in life. For now, watch the Hobbit movies in 24 frames a second. Because had I seen it in 24 frames a second and been fully immersed in the world of Middle-earth, I probably would have given it a higher rating. That being said, I stand by my rating in saying that the things that I had nitpicks about do stand as nitpicks that I still have, but just less nitpicks, but I can't renege on my rating. I do that, my credibility's lost. Fuck that noise. Just take heart in knowing that I absolutely profess that The Hobbit: An Unexpected Journey is a great movie, and the rating I would buy it on Blu-ray is an extremely positive rating advocating that I say every one of you should watch the movie. Because I don't buy crap on Blu-ray. Well, I have a couple of guilty pleasures on Blu-ray, but that's not the point. So The Hobbit: An Unexpected Journey, did you see it in 48 frames a second or 24 frames a second? If you saw it in 48 frames a second, you're like, watch it in 24 frames a second. You'd be surprised how it makes a difference. But whatever you thought at 24 frames a second or 48 frames a second, comment below, let me know. And as always, if you like what you've seen here and you want to see more, click right here to see more.